today's interview on renovating faith contains some more topics that are possibly triggering and possibly a little disturbing. So again, if you have younger ears, we do encourage you to maybe wait till a little bit later, or just at least be aware of the conversation that's going on, so that no one is offended or anything like that. That said, please enjoy this episode of Renovating Faith. Welcome back to Renovating Faith, and we are an alternate media podcast. And please like and subscribe. You can subscribe to our channel, subscribe to the alternate media channel, and I'm excited for the direction that our channel's going, and of course, big things happening at alternate media as well. I'm very excited for tonight's guest, Amber from When Deep Calls Deep, and also from Faith Unaltered, which we've had Tyler on the
Mhm.
show. And that was a terrific conversation. Got to hear his testimony. And then I most recently actually listened to, so I work at a church, and our church has a gym, and that's when I typically get to do my podcast listening. So it's 20 to 30 minutes at a time. And I listened to your episode on why Leviticus matters, and it was
Mhm.
awesome. So if you haven't if you haven't looked at When Deep Calls Deep, you need to go tune in. But definitely check out why Leviticus matters. It's absolutely incredible. Of course, as a Torah observant Christian, I believe Leviticus definitely matters, but I loved your guys' perspective on everything. Just very positive, it was awesome. I'm not going to give spoilers. You need to go watch it. So, and of course, Amber's also very involved in the church split group. And as all of us love to do, she roasts Will heavily, and it's amazing. Amber, I don't know if you know, I've known Will for over a decade. In fact, I've known
Mm.
Will longer than his wife. I make a joke that I've known Will since the year 1 BC, which is before. So, and then
That's fun.
you're also heavily involved in the Overlap Life group. Are you a
Mhm.
moderator or admin in there officially?
Nope, he hasn't pinned me down to do that yet. No, I'm still whistling out of it.
Okay. And but you are heavily involved and a huge
Mhm.
encouragement over there. So go check out both of those groups. They're great places to grow theologically, ask questions, and if you're interested more in the Torah observant life, Alternate Media also does have the Messianic Orthodox Messianic group as well on Facebook, and you can ask any questions you want about Messianic Judaism and how we follow Jesus Christ, how we believe that Judaism should follow Christ as well. So. Um, that said, we're going to just dive in here, and we are talking today about chronic autoimmune conditions and several perspectives on that. And Amber has probably most of the thoughts, and I have questions, but we were chatting a little bit over Messenger, and just kind of gotten to chat a little bit here and there through the different groups. And so I'm excited about this conversation. We're going to, as always, bring faith and renovation into the conversation,
Mhm.
but I think you've got a lot more background than I do. I have a little bit. So, Amber, welcome to Renovating Faith, and the show is yours.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. I'm so excited about this because I really like your podcast. And Tim Barber put that group together, and it was like, hey, and I made the connection. I was like, oh my gosh, I love your show. It's so funny.
I,
That was
I
one of the
actually,
few ones that I actually get like starstruck about.
oh wow, that's cool. I was telling my
Yeah.
wife we were putting the girls to bed before we record, and I was like, "Yeah, I've got an interview." She goes, "You have an interview?" I said, "Yeah, it's." I put it on the calendar, and she goes, "I get so many notifications." And she goes, "Well, who's it with?" And I was explaining, and I told her that story, and she goes, "You have fans?" So I was like, "Yes, I have
Yep.
at least one."
Definitely, because I love having positive conversations with people. And I think there's so many negative conversations going on. The fact that we can have positive ones really speaks into a dark space and
Yeah,
puts, I think, faith in a very good light, which is desperately needed right now.
absolutely.
So,
Well, thank you so
yeah.
much, and again, welcome. And I'm going to let you drive the conversation, and I'm going to sit talk a little bit and ask questions, and we'll just have a good time fellowshipping.
All right. Yeah. So, yeah, we got talking about this initially because I was like, there's something that's not getting talked about a lot in especially when you grow up with autoimmune and chronic health conditions and what that does to you and to your identity and your sense of personhood because it's a
Yeah.
very difficult way to grow up. And so this is a story I don't think I've ever publicly told before. So this is going to be kind of interesting to see, how this goes. But when I was about I was in my in my preteens, the summer before I started in seventh grade. We were running around doing what you do when you go camping and doing all the other stuff. And somewhere in there, they think that we ended up with some contaminated camp water somewhere, and all of us kids, there was me, my brother, and a bunch of my cousins. Everybody got sick, and it was different forms because the virus hit all of us differently. And in my family, we have a genetic defect that just happened to get in weird way just kind of kicked in by this virus that we got, and I was the only one who this happened to out of all of the kids. But we got home, and after a couple weeks or so, my mom was like, "Hey, you look kind of funny because my eyes are turning yellow, my skin was turning yellow, and I was just not feeling well at all." And so it took me into the pediatrician. And I thought, oh, it's just a mild case of something like a hepatitis or something. Take this and just gonna kind of sleep it off. It'll be and it'll be all right.
Take two pills, calm.
And and pretty much. But within 3 weeks, I was so sick that I couldn't even get out of bed,
Mm.
and I was put on a critical list, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And it took them a while. And this was back in the day, so I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but this is back before the only when the only real autoimmune condition that people knew anything about was HIV/AIDS. And
Okay.
so to talk about, say, I have an autoimmune condition, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a bit, but people just didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
That there was no, they didn't really know, even what autoimmune conditions were. They just knew HIV/AIDS, bad, lots of stigma, horrible, horrible, horrible. So, well, it was before, though. It's even older than that. So
Oh,
we're going
okay.
way back machine. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Most people don't even know how, I never talk about how old I actually am. So people don't
Well, you're
really,
in
I'm
college,
dating
so
myself. Right. Right. Yeah. So we'll just go with that.
you
Um,
college. I love it.
absolutely. Yeah. So, anyway, so by the time so I wasn't able to go to school. So me and the super nerd that I am didn't get to go to school for the first, gosh, half of my seventh grade year. I was home, and so when I was eventually they diagnosed some kind of, um, originally they just called it submassive hepatic necrosis, which is Latin doctor speak for most of your liver is dead.
Oh,
And and didn't know what was causing it. They didn't know why. And these were the very first when the beginnings of liver transplants were starting to roll out, and they were starting to do them because they just not very long before this come off the experimental list. So it was still kind of a new thing, and it was even more difficult than it is now to get in and to because it was still so new, and it was still so dangerous, and they just weren't as well done or safe as they are now, and
yeah.
because it was in the beginning, right? But so they finally figured out that it was caused by an autoimmune condition that was never actually named, that was causing my immune system to attack my liver, and that was also, in that process, killing the spleen, and it was damaging the kidneys, and most all of that that whole digestive process system was in danger, and which left me without a full immune system because that is involved with that whole hepatic system's involved heavily in your immune system. And then at that point, they didn't have a lot of the stuff that they have now for treatment options, and so I was put on a really insane dose of like prednisone and then an immune suppressant blocker that now um, they would never ever do this to a child, right?
Yeah.
So I'm still, 12, 13, 14 in this whole process of going through all this. And it was really horrible. And there's just all kinds of it just the damage that kind of because normally if you think about like being put on prednisone if you have like asthma or something, they'll put you on like half a milligram in your inhaler is a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a heavy dose. And I was on for a while 400 milligrams a day,
Okay.
which is insane.
Yeah.
It can kill you. And they're like, but it was to the point where you're going to die anyway. So will we at least do something to try to not have you die? And it might kill you, but you're going to die anyway if we don't. So it was kind of that roll of the dice, which is worse, dying quickly or dying slowly, kind of math. And then the whole process of being put on three different transplant lists and how all that works and all of the medical stuff that's involved in terminal care, because I was terminal for 4 years. I spent on the terminal list, which is another terrible way to live,
Yeah.
you know. And then but it took that long for them to finally be able to um, for that, I think it was just divine healing really in the end because they never did figure out why I got better. No one could ever explain it. It just kind of one day they would, mess with the med mix and the way it wasn't supposed to work started working. And then eventually after 5 years, the blood numbers finally came back normal for it was a very long time. So I was in
Yeah.
college, I think, before it finally got resolved. Um, but it's just, yeah. So, but in that process, and the part that really I think was the most damaging when you're a kid, especially, then the rules about minors in the medical system were were different. So, now kids have more ability to say and to speak up and things like that. But then they were still in the older view. So you would have absolutely no say in what was happening. And so you would have to go, I remember having to go through a lot of very, very painful procedures. And like, I don't know if anybody has ever had a liver biopsy before, but those are horrible. And you get this needle that's like, it's longer than a ruler. I mean, this thing is really huge because it's got
Huge.
to go all the way through and they can't put you to sleep or put you under because you have to hold your breath because if you don't, the protective layer on your liver will deflect that big needle and it can puncture all kinds of things like lungs and spleens and like it can do a lot of damage. So you have to be awake and you have to be able to hold your breath while they're doing all of this. And so it hurts a lot and it makes a lot of really weird noises and it's really scary when you're a kid. And so there's a lot of powerlessness for children in the medical system. And so you get as you're in that, so I remember going through so many times just internally, screaming, I don't want to do this. I'd rather be dead than do this
Yeah.
because, you're just like this is horrible. It hurts. I feel terrible. I don't want any of this. And it's, and there were situations where there was inappropriate um, things that happened a couple times by doctors that I was subjected to and abusive treatment by nurses. I woke up during endoscopies and other procedures a few times and I remember one time it was in the middle of an endoscopy, which is when they take that tube and stick it down your throat to do the video of your esophagus to see what damage is there or what. And I woke up when he wasn't done yet. And when you got something big down your throat like that, your gag reflex is just going to kick in. You can't control that. And I remember that tech who started yelling at me to stop gagging because he wasn't done yet and he couldn't finish while I was gagging. And he and the anesthetician got into a fight because he wanted the guy to put me under again. And the anesthetician's like, no, I can't. Or the anesthesiologist, sorry, was like, I can't do that. she's already awake and it would take too long and you'd be finished by the time she went back under anyway. So those two got into an argument in the middle, and then I'm there just like trying to be a good kid to not,
Yeah.
not gag myself to death on this thing a second. So it just, and that really was also very, those kinds of things are very scarring when you're a kid. They're terrifying, and it just, so there was a lot of trauma that was involved in all of that procedure. And but what that also does, um, is that sense of powerlessness can strip you of feeling like a person at all. When you have absolutely no say, you have no control over your body, you have no control over your a voice to say what you do and do not want. And like now, thanks to the work of people like Van der Kolk and his book, The Body Keeps a Score, they're starting to understand that things like it was explained to me in part of my recovery process of the trauma recovery stuff, that unwanted penetration of your person gets stored in your memory as sexual trauma. So they're starting to understand, like, oh, there's a lot of, not a lot, but there are medical trauma victims who behave like sexual trauma victims. And they couldn't figure out the connection why until some of this work by like Van der Kolk and some of these other people started coming out, that they understand that that's actually stored that way. So you're going to react to situations like you've experienced sexual trauma when it's just medical, it's that invasive um, violation of your person.
Yep.
So by the time we got done with all of that, and I started um, actually being able to scrape together some sort of a semblance of a life, I had no connection to the image of God anymore. I had almost no concept of personhood,
I was
no
gonna
concept.
ask,
Yeah.
before we dive into that,
Mhm.
through all of this, what was your faith background? Were you raised in church? Like talk a little through those
Yeah.
earlier years, but let's kind of keep this in sections because I think we're
Yeah.
moving to
Okay.
a deeper spot. So
Sorry.
let's give
Yeah.
just a little
Okay.
background as we move in, so we can see how your faith is
Yeah.
changed and affected.
Yeah. So I grew up, my parents were a ministry team in the non-denominational independent Christian church, which is a branch, if you're familiar, a branch of what's called the Restoration Movement, which
Okay.
is, Disciples of Christ, Christian Church, Church of Christ. That's kind of that. It's a little bit smaller of an unknown kind of movement, unless you are aware of who they are.
Right.
But and that's kind of so I grew up, my dad, we did mostly small town churches. My dad did the senior pastor and all of that stuff, and my mom did the music and the
Oh, so you're
youth
a PK.
program. So I'm a PK, that's right. I was a
It's a
PK,
fun club.
and it is. It definitely is an interesting club, that's for sure. And so, growing up, faith was just part of life. There wasn't um we didn't not have a choice, but it was just kind of the way we lived. And it was just very much so. I remember becoming having a personal connection with Jesus at age 9. So it started really early for me, but just because it was just the way that we lived. And I've always had a deeper a pull towards deeper. And so that just kind of even came out that young. So I remember giving my life to Christ personally at 9 years old. And but that was really important to make it through all of this process, because I don't think that I would have mentally survived at all without having that retreat into that place of faith. But um, it also became a very difficult thing because of um, the situation of stigma and not understanding autoimmune and how a lot of the community and people reacted. Church also became a place of hurt. So I remember, being told not to come back to church. I wasn't allowed to go to church
Mm.
for quite a while because they didn't understand what it was back in, stigma with AIDS and this whole. I remember one time one of these well-meaning older saintly women in our church cornered me when my parents were busy because they were usually pretty careful to keep an eye on who we were and head off anything like that. But this woman came in and caught me unguarded one day and grilled me on what were all the secret sins of my family that we were being afflicted this way
Oh my
with
God.
all these terrible plagues and it was all my fault and like it just there's a lot of blaming and shaming that was going on.
I
um
love when people don't read their
and
Bible to understand that sometimes God just allows things for his glory and for
I
us to
mhm.
grow and for, Paul to have a thorn in the flesh and gotta
Yeah, so
love
there
men
was
that just know exactly
yeah,
what's going on in the world.
it was definitely the beginning ripples of some very tumultuous relationship with church,
Yeah,
but that always seemed to be a separate retreat from my own personal faith. So it was a very long journey to try to reconnect the two
yeah,
of my personal faith and a being able to find a home in a church community that took a very long time to get that reconciled because of experiences like that continued for several years. Going through Bible college is a rough experience for anybody, and doing that when you were very young because I had a relapse of the autoimmune condition when I was at the end towards the end of high school. So they decided um, for a variety of reasons to go ahead and graduate me out a year early. So I ended up graduating at 16 and then started undergrad, which in retrospect is probably a terrible idea. Um, and but jumping into that, then that it had its own hosts of issues and problems. But
sure.
yeah, it's been faith has always been the thing that has internally held me together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool to hear. I love that. Love that so much. That's kind of I shared this way early on in the show, but my wife and I went through some very traumatic experience, and it really was the faith that gets you through those things. So
Mhm.
that's cool to hear that, especially at such a young age. As an adult going through things, yeah, faith is definitely a big thing, but that those formative years are so important.
Mhm.
So awesome. All right, so now let's plug back into your story. Um, we put the physical side and the faith side and put them together. So all right, let's go.
Right. Okay. So what that ends up doing, I think, is that for me anyway, created a detach from being able to be feel like an image bearer of
Yeah,
God. And it made this feeling like being not fully human because your personness, your personhood, that thing that makes you a human person, I guess. It's hard to put into words because it's not a definable thing, really. But when that gets damaged, you don't have full access to be a person, a full person. So you're almost this subset of human. So you always need, and it put a layer in between me and God in a weird kind of way. So trying to navigate church when you need a mediary because you're not fully human and you don't have the feel like you have access to the image of God. That and that also puts you in a place of being very vulnerable to spiritual abuse because you don't have any other way to feel like you can access God except for going through somebody who is fully human to help you bridge that gap that has been created in this break in your personhood. And so it really made um it challenging to to do um to do a lot of things and growing up in in a context where it the medical world wasn't safe. Doctors, and that's supposed to be a place where you go to get help and to get healing, and that became a place of violence and dehumanization, and a lot of that was just really some terrible things that happened there. So that wasn't a safe place. Church became an unsafe place because there was a lot of stigma, a lot of rejection. There was, like that woman that confronted me one day. There was that happened to me multiple times in multiple settings. So she wasn't an anomaly there. That kind of was a pattern. School, when you're a kid, school's supposed to be a safe place. But when I got sick, that was the first. There was the stigma of we don't know what this is. We're afraid of it. So there was a mass rejection. And when I couldn't go to school, it just kind of festered. And when I finally was able to start going back, I remember my parents had to end up threatening to sue the school district because they were trying to, in multiple levels, block my going back. The teachers union filed a grievance. The school board tried to close it down. And then when those um, were all shut down, and they had to admit they we don't have a reason for you not to come back to school. um, then there was the social like rejection. I remember I spent an entire year and a half where every time I would go anywhere, except for 4, 5, 6 people, six at the most, uh, core of very, very dear friends that I still get to have contact with now, which I love. But I remember I would go into the school cafeteria and to sit down at a table, and everyone at the entire table would get up and move. And I would go into classroom, and teachers didn't want me in their class, and the kids didn't want me in there. So a lot of times I got stuck at a desk in the corner, way in the back, so I wouldn't have to interact with anybody, and they wouldn't have to interact with me. There was a lot of threats. There was a lot of I would get like pushed down the stairs a lot, trying to get around and navigate between classes. They had to tape the vents of my locker shut because people kept putting, horrible notes and death threats. And there was a few times where they were pouring some pretty disgusting substances into my locker. I mean, it was a very terrible place. And,
Yeah.
you know, eighth grade and ninth grade could be tough on its own,
Yeah.
but to
When you're
do to
getting into
do
stuff like
that,
that,
yeah,
it gets worse.
yeah, it got pretty ugly. And so, school wasn't safe, church wasn't safe, the medical places weren't safe. And then there was some other things that were going on that made home a little bit rocky for a while there. That I don't want to go into some of that stuff. But so it became a place where the only safe place I had was internally and in my books. And so I could be like, I can go hide in my books. And that's part of why I know the Old Testament so well, because I could just go read the Old Testament over and over and over again. And look, somebody's having a worse day than me.
Yeah,
So, like, that's one of the things I love about the prophets, because
I
no
love
matter what's happening for me in my life, somebody's having a worse day than I am. I mean, I can always count on Jeremiah to be having a
right.
worse day than I am.
My go-to is like, am I as bad off as Job? No. All
Right.
right, let's keep going.
Right. I mean, not saying like I want to make light of that or anything, but that's one of the things that the prophets help us do, is give voice to that pain and suffering. So I would go hide in the Old Testament. I go hide in the prophets, and then I would read a lot. So I had it was just part of why I just gravitate towards deep and to deep things and deep people, because I have such a deep internal world, because I spent so much time there for such a long time, that you kind of too, as a place of surviving, you just
Yeah.
have to create these spaces. And so I just, that to me was a big retreat, and especially the old. So I get like, you're like, how do you know the Old Testament so well? Well, because I lived in it for a long time,
Yeah.
and just, over and over and over again. And um,
Well,
so yeah, that.
not to sidebar, but that I love that because my story is almost opposite in that way because growing up in I don't even know anymore if we were covenantal or dispensational or what. I just know it was weird. We spent so much time in the New Testament because it was, well, the Old
Mhm,
Testament is history, and but this is where we get our doctrine, right? It's
mhm,
on the verge of Marcionism, right? And so I've spent so much time there that as I, over the past 4 years, as I've gone into Torah studies and slowly venturing back into the prophets now, um, I read through and I'm like, oh, cross connect and this and this, and I'm seeing all of the New Testament stuff, and that's where at teaching at church, people are like, how do you know all this? And I'm like, well, I grew up being force fed with a funnel Paul. So
Yep.
now that I'm learning the right hermeneutics and the understanding of how a Jew looks at certain things, and then now we're going through all of this with prophecy and such, it's like, oh my gosh. And you talk about the word of God becoming very deep very, very quickly. So I'm kind of on the opposite side of that. The Old Testament is very new to me. Now I've read it several times, but I remember, and I think I've shared the story on the channel. I was going through Tom Bradford's Torah class, and of course, I grew up. The law is works, the Old Testament is
Hmm.
works, the New Testament is grace, and we love the song "Mercy Came Running" because God was bound; He couldn't save before, but mercy came running like a prisoner set free at the cross, and
Right.
all this stuff. And we get to Genesis chapter 6 or 9, and Noah, right? And he goes, if you
Hmm.
think that grace is an Old or a New Testament concept, read these words:
Hmm.
Noah found grace. And I was like,
Yes.
I was doing drywall in a house, alone, and I fell to my
Uh-huh.
knees weeping.
Oh,
I
wow.
had never been able to see that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever from Genesis to Revelation. And it finally hit
Hmm.
that He has always been a God of grace.
Hmm.
So yeah, I love that you've got that knowledge, because to me, I'm exploring that now. And part of what we're doing going forward with Renovating Faith is we're finding these Old Testament concepts that we
Hmm.
think are New Testament. So I'm not to give too many spoilers, but like the just shall live by faith is not a New
Hmm.
Testament concept.
Mm-mm. Nope.
Paul, we love to hear about Martin Luther and the Renaissance and or the Reformation, right? And that was his driving verse that he found. It was in Romans, and yet Paul was quoting an Old Testament prophet. And so it's these New Testament concepts that are really not new. So, um,
Hmm.
sidebar there. But anyway, so I love how much you love the prophets, because I'm just
Yeah.
getting into them and I'm blown away every time I do. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I had no clue what I've been missing. So, all
Yeah,
right.
I especially love like Habakkuk is my favorite of the
Yep.
prophetic books. I hate to say that because I feel like I'm being, unfaithful to Ezekiel because I love Ezekiel. And but Habakkuk was my favorite first,
Yeah.
just to be fair. And just that honest discourse that
Yeah.
you see between Habakkuk and God, and somebody
So
stands
good.
up and it's like, how dare you,
Yeah.
God, put up with this? Give me an answer.
Yeah.
But he does so in a way that God doesn't strike him dead when he does it. And I'm
And
just, I,
not again, not to sidebar, but again, the only place in Scripture. So this is something I'm going to get in trouble, that Calvinists love to say is God is too holy to look on sin. That is found in one place in the entirety of the Bible, and it's in the book of
Mhm.
Habakkuk. And Habakkuk, I'm going to paraphrase, but Habakkuk basically says, God, you're too holy to look on sin. And this is where we get the whole God turned his back on
Mhm.
Jesus at the cross. And Habakkuk says, you're too holy to look on sin. So why do you?
Right.
It's not that God can't look on sin. He is so holy that sin should be appalling. And yet, in our iniquity, in our sin, in our
Mhm.
filthiness, he does look on us. And he looks on us with love and with grace and with mercy and with patience and long suffering. And he says, I want to redeem you. And
You're
it's
preaching Ezekiel
so,
here, man.
so opposite of what certain
Mhm.
um, doctrines of grace teach. So, anyway,
Man,
this
you get me started on Ezekiel. We'll be here all week.
Oh, I know it, right?
I love Ezekiel, man. Yeah, when I went into prophets class, my professor was like, "Okay, this is the week we're gonna do Ezekiel," and I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna be sick that week, but I'm so glad you harassed me into making sure I came and set it up so well that now I'm like, it's all about Ezekiel.
Yeah.
It doesn't work without Ezekiel. It's just like, anyway, yeah, we're gonna get sidetracked here, but um, back to I don't even remember where we were now. Oh yeah, so for me, it has been a very, very long journey of recovery. I remember the in the middle of the worst of all the medical treatment and the medications and stuff that he gave me. I remember I was 14 years old and life was horrible. I had no friends, I had no community, I had no church. Basically, I could go, but it was still not the same
Yeah.
at that point because we were still struggling. There was a lot of a lot of things were going on and things were, my parents were burning out emotionally. It was just really, really tough. And I remember, so I was just started to get just really, really depressed. And that, because that was a side effect of putting a growing child on extreme doses of steroids is you're going to really mess them up.
Yeah.
And so I remember that spring, I was 14 years old, and that was the first time I attempted to take my own life because I was so physically miserable and so miserable everywhere that, the internal world can only sustain you to a certain point. And it just got so bad that so then they put me on a whole bunch of the earlier versions of some of those terrible antidepressant things, which messes up your brain even more. I'm not against medication, but I definitely think that was back when they were starting to really get too crazy with giving it to anybody
Yeah.
for any reason. And but it was, yeah, I remember it was really, really difficult, and it felt like such a dark, dark season. Um, and that was also very, I think, damaging to, when you're supposed to, those are the years where you're supposed to rebel. You're supposed to be a knothead. You're supposed to be like, get away with, oh, because they're just a kid. They don't know any better, kind of thing. And as part of that is breaking away to develop your own sense of your own identity and who you are and figuring out, all those pieces that you do in that transition phase. And when that is interrupted, it's very difficult to learn how to go back because you can't go back and redo that period of
Yeah.
your life. So you have to go back and learn how to fill in gaps with different types of skills. So I remember part of trauma recovery I had to go through. They put me through. It's called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. I always want to say diabolical because it was horrible and it was long, but
Probably more accurate.
but but it was helpful for the skill development part. That part was really, really helpful. But getting caught in the mental health system for a long time also didn't help. Um, because if you don't have that sense of having being a person at all, trying to go through the processes to reclaim your identity and to move forward as a healthy individual when you don't even know what a healthy individual is supposed to be because you never get to develop that
Yeah.
can be really, really scarring. And it takes a very, very long time to come back from that process. But um, yeah, so I think that's kind of the some of that more internal side of some of that. And then there's also for a lot of us who have had chronic conditions for a long time, autoimmune is one of those terrible gifts that keeps on giving. So once you get one, it's never enough. So you just keep, they keep kind of replicating or whatever that is inside that happens. And then with all the damage from those extreme doses of medication. So, I deal with permanently damaged immune system. So I always have to be very careful everywhere we go and um, to keep, because I will get everything all the time. And I'm
You're
still,
not you're not having to
just
walk around in a bubble suit yet,
right,
so
right,
we're doing okay-ish.
right. Right. It's like I just have to be careful. I have to make
Yeah.
sure to like wash my hands. And most of the time, like when I was on campus, I have hand sanitizer in my bag all the time and just try to be reasonably cautious to not get into a situation where I'm going to get sick because like I'm still fighting off. This is week 5, I think, of a respiratory thing.
Ooh,
And it just because I don't, something that'll take people 1 or 2 weeks takes me 5 or 6,
yeah.
sometimes 7 weeks, a couple of months for me to recover from. And, that's just the reality of not having a fully functioning immune system. And, I have to be careful because I still have a lot of like liver scarring that gives me a limited liver function. There's just a lot of internal damage that happens from surviving an autoimmune condition like that, and then all of the ones that come from the damage that's done, and the fact that they keep adding, you keep getting more and more autoimmune conditions because you never get just one of them,
Yeah.
right? And so you end up getting doing a lot of I do a lot of managing of chronic conditions and balancing and having to do more and more work with trying to, making sure because what makes one happy makes the other one cranky. And so trying to balance, sometimes with two different types of like,
Like having two kids
just
with opposite
stuff.
personalities.
Right.
These ones don't
Right.
get along.
So yeah, certain things like heat helps. It makes the other one mad. And so when you ice it, then it makes that one better. And then the other one gets cranky and just, moving helps some and not moving helps the other ones. And so it's a balance
Bible-quoting
of
Revelation
like,
saying, I wish you would be lukewarm just once.
yeah, exactly. You're just like, you guys, there's this constant balance of trying to navigate between what's going to make the different autoimmune conditions cranky. And there's certain things you can't eat, and there are certain things you can't just, the list after a while, you're just like, I don't mind at this exact moment being wrong in my position about rapture because we could just be done with this whole mess and I would be okay with that. That would be fine with me. Like, that's one time I am perfectly happy to be wrong because I'm ready done balancing all these chronic conditions because it becomes really challenging and some days you're just like, nope, I'm just gonna nope, not gonna do it. And you just have to occasionally.
I don't know what it's like to deal with it from your side, but we in 2000, so we I grew up for 5 years on the mission field. And in the year 2000, we moved back to the States to my mom's hometown. And my dad had been dealing with some of the symptoms, but really started going to the doctor and was diagnosed before really they tried to say he didn't have it. They're like, you have all the symptoms, but you're too young. He was in his 30s. And he had RA and fibromyalgia.
Mhm. Mhm.
And at the time, and I think there's more treatments now, but at the time, the only real treatments were hydrocodone or oxycodone. And my dad
Mhm.
knew they're highly addictive. And he said, I've seen two typical responses when people get this diagnosis. They either get addicted to the drugs or they curl up and become useless. And he said, I'm not gonna do that. Of course, I was 7, almost 8 at the time. Older brother, sister, younger brother. Um, you know, and dad
Mhm.
was a highly involved parent and still, he's still alive. But we're all grown up now. And I remember there, like his treatment, what he did is he took the max amount of Tylenol and the max amount of
Mhm.
ibuprofen in alteration and spread out, and he did what he could. And
Mhm.
he was I mean, he worked through a lot of pain. And I remember every Monday, dad was also my junior high basketball coach. And as we got older, of course, we got more competitive, and the closer we got to his size, the more competitive we got. And so we'd go out in the driveway and play 2-on-2, just the guys.
Mhm.
And typically it was first one to five, and then we'd switch up the teams, and we'd play about 4 rounds. Well, one day dad was feeling really good, and we played, I want to say 8 or 10 rounds of hard basketball. I mean, I'm a junior or senior at this point, and my little brother and I are both bigger than dad as far as height. Um, we're in the best physical shape of our lives, and he is going as hard as he can. And the next day, he couldn't get out of bed.
Mhm.
And I've always looked back knowing from that moment on, thinking back about how much pain he dealt with just on a daily basis. Um, because there weren't treatment plans, there weren't
Mhm.
alternatives, even as recent as the early 2000s for some of these things. And, the grace of God to be able to say, I have this,
Mhm.
you're in control. You've allowed me to have this for a reason, and I'm not going to let it cripple me. I'm going to do what I can and leave the rest up to you. And that's how he lived as a parent, as a minister, and then later on as an employee when he ended up leaving ministry, getting a regular job. Um, and to deal with the things that you had to deal with at even a much younger age, I can't imagine. But just knowing the grit that he had to have every single day just to do
Mhm.
stuff that I take for granted. I mean, getting on the floor and playing with my girls is something I don't think twice about. And he had to think about the risks every single time he got down because it might mean not getting up the next day from the amount of pain. Because I mean, the description he gave is,
Mhm.
I've been hit by a train.
Mhm.
That's what your body feels like. So, um, that's just I'm amazed every time I hear stories of people who are just like, there weren't good treatment plans, so I dealt with it because this is what I have to do. So,
Mhm.
I always find that highly impressive. So, thank you.
Yeah, I mean that really resonates because there are certain, there are certain things and certain realities. Like they're starting to understand now that um various types of like I have a lot of I had a lot of like post-traumatic stress disorder issues,
Yep.
it's medical things and stuff like that. And that actually is one of the few mental health issues that they can show on a brain scan. So
Yep.
you can actually see where those have damaged and limited. So, like now I have at school, I have certain things that I have to do for accommodations just because it just that's the reality. And there are days where it's just that, yep, it's not going to happen today. So I'm just gonna, that's one of the things that though for me, going back to school and now, just all this crazy weirdness that's going on with this online stuff. Like I never ever like you had told me before I like last year, the turn of when 2024 started that I would be here right now doing everything that I'm doing. I'd been like, you're nuts. I don't
Yeah.
like talking to people. I don't like being on camera. I don't like all these things I don't like to do. And here I am doing them and I'm absolutely loving it because I'm having a blast. But this is one of those things that I can do that some of the things that sometimes some of my autoimmune conditions and damage from the autoimmune
Yeah.
conditions don't stop me from doing. So even on days where I'm like, I'm just in too much pain to do very much at all, physically, and just leaving the house is just not going to be a thing. I can still sit here and come and have these fantastic conversations with people. I get this great excuse to be a bookworm. I have this great
Yeah.
excuse
I
to
love it.
study and to go back to school because I can do that remotely. And I changed programs recently because some issues with the school I was at, but and I missed that being in person on campus. That was really nice. But now, it is nice to also have the option because if I wake up and it's just going to be one of those days and it's like, nope, I don't have to really push myself to the point of where I'm going to regret it later because I can just, do it from here and do it from home and I'm still not having to push myself too much that way. So it in a way this, has given me an avenue to find a lot of great friends and get into in some really awesome conversations and doing some really fun things, that I probably would not be doing had it not be for the journey that I've been on, because I would be out doing all kinds of other things. Who knows, what that path would have looked like. And I sometimes I wonder, but I try not to live there because I don't want to take for granted where I am now and the things that I have found now and going through a very, very long journey and getting to the place now. I have found the most fantastic church home that I have never felt like that is home before in a way that has. And have had some pretty amazing, miraculous encounters and met God in some very physical ways in this church that I absolutely adore. And the people are fantastic. And I'm just like, I'm getting this depth that I've been looking for a really long time. And now, the friends that I've made in the online community and part of the fun of making fun of like giving Will such a hard time, it's just that he's just a fun guy to give a hard time to. But we also have had some really interesting conversations and he's been like on my channel, he's a fantastic guy to talk to.
Oh yeah.
And he, it has given me a whole different attitude and different perspective because now being on the part of life where I'm stepping into this fully healed and discovering who that fully healed self is for the first time ever, which is amazing. And I just get to be, because I've gotten a few people who've criticized me for, coming across as this, as my positive and gratitude approach as being like fake or being like ingenuine, which I kind of laugh at that
Yeah.
because most anybody who's talked to me for more than about 10 minutes has, figured out that's not really the case because, when you have one of the things that you learn, I think, that I've learned anyway, in this journey is that actual, I think for me, real gratitude is a very expensive thing. And so, people who have true gratitude and true joy, not based on this happy coffee mug thing that we have going around,
There's
people
that
who truly understand, when they have, when you truly understand joy and you truly understand gratitude, that is something that is not fakeable.
yeah.
But people who don't understand that because they haven't had to pay the price for that don't quite get it and it looks fake to them because they haven't gotten to the point in their journey where they've had to pay the price to learn that yet. And so when they've paid as heavy a price for that as I have, I just can't help now but be like, well, let's just be me and be happy and be positive because I have every reason to, because I have so many things in life now that I have paid enough of a price for. I have paid more than my pound of flesh to be grateful and to have as much joy as I can in this whole process that, I just every day wake up, even no matter what kind of state that everything else is in, because today I get to come and like today I get to come have this conversation with
Yeah.
you. And today I've been having a blast, just joking around with some of my friends in Messenger and just having I get to have great conversations with people. I've met people all over the map that, having, in these
I
great,
mean, prime
and this,
example,
like,
the Leviticus conversation, you had someone
uh-huh.
from Australia. I mean, that is so cool.
Right. Well, right now, the people that I consider my close friend circle from the online community, we've got Seventh Day Adventists, American Baptists, Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic,
Yeah.
we got some Oneness Pentecostals. We got a little bit of everything in there, and I love it because I'm just having a great time, and we're learning from each other, and they challenge me to like, okay, so why do I think that? Why do I? Why am I, what is going on with this whole Sabbath on the Saturday thing? Like, why?
Yeah.
And it's made me go back and look at it again and go like, huh, okay. I understand where you're coming from. I might not agree with you, but
Sure.
it makes me have to, go back and dig and figure out my own theology and wrestle with God even deeper because I have to, not debunk you, but figure out me,
Yeah,
clarifying my own positions. So,
absolutely. This episode is also going to be a two-parter, it looks like. So I'm excited to have Amber on, and this has been a terrific conversation, just hearing her story and getting to share. Join us next week. We'll go ahead and put the trigger warning at the beginning, just because I don't remember exactly how much crazy we got in the last half of this. But next week, we're going to be having a lot of fun just diving into some light theological conversation and just having a good time fellowshipping. It'll be a little bit less intense than our last conversation. So just stay tuned next week and look forward to seeing you there. But in the meantime, as you're going through your renovating process, no matter what you're facing, uh, we want you to know that God loves you. He's here for you. He is seeking you out. And we want you to know that you can go through this without having to leave the faith completely. And we do hope, as always, that the Lord will bless you and keep you. He will cause his face to shine on you and be gracious unto you and give you peace.